Happy Wednesday, Justin. How are ya?
Feeling lovely today. How about you? I find myself here in a lithium mine. What about you?
I'm on some stock photo that I found on the internet with electric vehicles behind me. Yours is much more entertaining. Justin, big news this morning, man. Big news. Just last night, the Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law by President Biden. That means all of this conjecture, all the things we've been talking about for the past few weeks, I guess about a week and a half, it like that, snap your fingers. It's in effect.
Yes. Now, well, not all of it. The Made in
Okay.
America portion, which is the most impactful portion of this new bill, is now in effect. So, unless you had a written binding contract to purchase in place signed before yesterday or before 3:30 p.m. yesterday, as silly as that sounds, uh, now you are subject to the Made in America provision, and that's what a lot of people are kind of freaking out about.
Yeah, well, let's dig into it. Let's talk a little bit about why this is so important. You mentioned yesterday at 3:30 was the cutoff. Let's dig into that a little bit and what this means moving forward. And we have done a lot of videos, a lot of streams on this, so some of this may be repetitive if you've been joining us every single day in day out. But now it is here, so it's worth really digging back into. Why was yesterday at 3:30 so important?
That is when President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. And out of all of the provisions within the new EV tax credit, the one that took effect as soon as it was signed was the Made in North America provision. That means that even the White House themselves, they were touting that there are still 20 EVs that qualify for the tax credit for the rest of 2022, or at least until the Treasury Secretary finalizes the battery sourcing rules. So they're bragging basically that the number of eligible EVs just dropped from 72 to 20. They think that's something to brag about, but perhaps it's true because the battery sourcing requirements have not gone into effect yet. They will at some point between now and December 31st. Many out there are suspecting that maybe to have a bit of mercy upon those of us who love to buy EVs, they may wait until the very last day that the bill provides for, which would be December 31st. So, yeah.
Which vehicles, which are the 20? I mean, I don't expect you to go through the entire list here, but if you have it, that'd actually be super helpful.
Yeah, so currently eligible, we've got the Rivian R1S and R1T because the price cap does not go into effect until the secretary finalizes the rules. So that means the Lucid Air is still eligible too. They are built in the United States of America. You've got the Nissan Leaf, which unfortunately Nissan has announced is going to be on its way out. Sad situation since that's one of the only affordable options we still have, but the Leaf is still eligible. We've got a few plug-in hybrids, the Wrangler plug-in hybrid, Jeep Grand Cherokee, Lincoln Aviator, Corsair plug-in hybrid, the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, which is hard to find. It's mostly in California, sometimes New York.
Yep.
Ford Mustang Mach-E, that's a big one. It still qualifies for the full credit because they have not started to bring in the battery sourcing requirements. Once we find out where Ford gets their battery minerals from, which keep in mind, Ford doesn't make the battery packs. They have a contract. They have a few contracts, one of which is with
Yeah.
LG Chem, one of which is with CATL, until the Treasury Secretary finalizes those rulings. And then we all have to find out where do they get their lithium from and their cobalt and whatever minerals are required in the battery pack. The Mustang Mach-E still qualifies for the full credit. So it's just a matter of time until these rulings are finalized.
I can't believe that you just mentioned some of the most expensive electric
Yeah.
vehicles are now
Ironic,
with
huh?
the Tesla Model Y, I guess, the one that's made in Austin, that would also qualify?
No. Okay. So, yeah, there's so many dates. Ray and I, everyone, look forward to this, everyone, because Ray and I recorded a video just yesterday coming out tomorrow that is the timelines, the effective dates for every single portion of this bill. Yeah. And thanks to the crowd, because we've crowdsourced a lot of information to make sure we understand this thoroughly. But let me answer your question, Zach. The Tesla Model Y, bad news if you're about to take delivery of a Tesla, because the 200,000 sale cap will not be lifted from the original tax credit that was in effect since 2008. It will not be lifted until the first of the new year. That is firm within the bill. So if you're buying
Gotcha.
a Tesla in September, October, November, December, you're not going to have eligibility, unfortunately.
Does Toyota's phase out period begin this year? Would that be something to consider as a Toyota hybrid purchaser?
I don't know,
See,
Zach.
this gets like super complex. I recognize that we're pushing in a direction where we have like energy independence, where we don't have to rely on other countries to be able to source battery packs and things like that. But holy hell, for this intermediary period, Justin, you're like the hot man on the street. Like everyone's gonna want to know what how to interpret these things.
Yeah, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm trying my best. Little junior lawyer, need a little sticker right here. But
Yeah.
um oh Zach, we were talking about Toyota. One thing I do know that's within the
Yep.
bill is that everything about the original tax credit, except for the 200,000 sale cap, is invalidated now that Biden has signed this bill. So just pretend like there's no phase out period. What matters now
Wow.
is that the made in North America requirement goes into effect. The Toyota BZ4X, the Lexus RZ, they are not made in North America. When it comes to plug-in hybrids, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't know where they make their plug-in hybrids. Uh, Actually, I just
Yeah, I
researched
don't
this,
know
Zach.
either.
I'm going to pull it up and get back to it later in the stream, but I'm pretty sure the Prius plug-in hybrid and RAV4 plug-in hybrid are not qualifying because they're not assembled here in North America. We got some good
Yep.
questions in the
Yep.
chat, though.
Let's pull some of them up, Justin. I'll defer to you.
Okay. Not many people talking about the new adjusted gross income requirements. This is true. Let's talk about it. So,
Yep.
this is not in effect until January 1st. And I know, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago at this point, we were still trying to figure this out, but we now know the answer. January 1st, 2023. That is when the following income limits go into effect. Single filers, 150,000 adjusted gross income, head of household, 225, and joint filers, 300,000. Now, we've talked about this plenty, Zach, and don't need to go into it too far, but the quality of lifestyle and what you're able to afford varies dramatically based on where you live in the United States. If you
Sure.
live in California, a household income of 300,000 is going to be very different from if you lived in like Tennessee, you know? So it's interesting how that is just across the board. And Ray was also telling me he's kind of surprised they didn't include any kind of clause in there to adjust it for inflation or anything over the next 10 years because this bill expires in 2032. We have this for 10 years unless, new legislation changes that.
Yeah, you've got to wonder about the efficacy of these thresholds and income limitations, the price for used EVs that qualify, the price for new EVs that qualify, broken down by the different segments. All of that is going to look a little, I don't know, funky, even just 2 or 3 years from now if inflation continues to go in the direction that it is. Justin, what about we've got here from Paul? How much are prices by manufacturers increased due to knowing that there's a discount at the buyer's end? Will this actually help wean us off these credits? And this ties into those thresholds for where vehicles actually qualify for receiving tax rebates, tax incentives.
Yeah, this is the golden question right here. So before we touch on this a little further, let's talk about the price caps for the vehicles themselves. For
Yep.
sedans, $55,000. For SUVs, trucks, and vans, it's $80,000. Now, how are manufacturers going to respond to this? Well, I know Learning Fast in the chat was pointing out earlier on that this clearly gives an upper hand to Tesla because Tesla doesn't have to worry about additional dealer markups. They set their prices as they want to. They do change them often, but you've got one price across all Tesla Model Ys, for example. However, we are going to have to watch closely and see how the EVs that do qualify for the new tax credits. So let's say Ford Mustang Mach-E for the time being, it's likely to continue to qualify. The Chevy Bolt is going to qualify. We're going to have to see how dealers are treating their prices if they know that the EV they're selling is a hot commodity because it qualifies. And then if you're talking about MSRPs, what are they going to do with MSRPs? I don't know. That's just all speculation at this point. I mean, even Tesla, I hope they don't, but they could, in theory, raise the price of the Tesla Model Y even further. It's currently at 65,000 because the Model Y is going to qualify for this incentive, at least half of it.
Yeah. You've got to imagine that we've now set up some new rules in the game for OEMs, and really, I'm going to just say OEMs, not even dealers, because look at Ford. They have Ford Model E coming. Well, I guess it's next year. So we're going to see, I think, some gamesmanship here, where essentially, all right, here's the threshold. I'm going to put it right up against that and sell it for the most money possible, knowing that taxpayers are subsidizing the interest in that potential vehicle. It's going to be very, very interesting, and I think there's so many good comments here in the chat. Let's pull this up from Learning Fest. Do you expect Tesla market share to increase next year? because the best-selling Model Y will get the tax credit for the first time? Or to your point, Justin, do you think Tesla's going to see that increase in demand and just raise the price even more?
Well, I've actually ruminated a lot on this question. Shout out to the bovines out there ruminating. But yeah, I've thought about this, and honestly, here's what I think. I think that even though it's technically up to $7,500 with this incentive, for most, if not everyone, it's going to be half of that, which is 3750. That's because if you have at least 50% of your battery components produced in the United States or free trade agreement countries, you get access to half of the 7500. The other half is going to be a lot harder to come by, and I'm going to tie this back to Tesla here in a second.
Sure.
In order to get that second half of the tax credit, you have to have at least 40% of the minerals in the battery pack sourced from the US or free trade agreement countries. I don't know of anyone who's able to firmly meet that from day one on January 1st, 2023. So here's where my opinion lies. This is going to be known amongst the public, who pay attention to EV tax credit news. This is going to become known as a 3750 incentive rather than a 7500 incentive. That, just saying it, 3750. That doesn't carry quite the weight as $7,500. Now, if you start to talk about a difference of about 3750 between the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and let's say the Mustang Mach-E, that is not such a huge difference. And I think because of that, more and more buyers are going to start to walk back their comments that they made out of fury, which was that, oh, I'm not going to buy the Ioniq 5 or the EV6 anymore because, it doesn't get the credit. Well, when they think about how much they really want the vehicle they're interested in, and they think about how it's really going to come down to 3750, not 7500, they may still go out and make that purchase for the car they wanted all along. So Tesla's market share, I think it's going to hold steady, but not increase. I don't think it's going to be quite the magnitude of impact that we thought it might be like a week ago.
Do you remember, Justin? I mean, this was just the end of last year. We thought maybe there was a $12,500
yes.
EV tax incentive around the corner, and now you're right. This is for all intents and purposes, this is a $3,750 tax credit. Even though ourselves included, we'll refer to it as the $7,500 tax incentive. The moment you get into the weeds, you realize what you just said. No one at this point knows where the battery components are being sourced. Well, maybe those that work within these organizations, and something tells us that probably 40% don't come from the United States or countries that we have free trade agreements with. I guess Australia becomes like our new best friend when it comes to mining those minerals.
I would bet that you have to get pretty high up within the executive chain of these automakers to find out, to be able just to know offhand where your battery minerals come from. Most of them do not know because, like we said, they get them from battery suppliers, whether it's Panasonic, LG Chem, which has now changed its name to LG Energy Solutions because they had the whole debacle with the Chevy Bolt fires. They made those batteries. Anyway, so they changed their name. And then CATL, which is out of China. There's a lot that they themselves don't know because they're not the ones making the batteries. Tesla makes some of their batteries, their 4680 cells. But even Panasonic makes most of those. So we will have to find out, Zach. It's very, very interesting. But something came to mind, and I've got to say it before it slips my mind because there's so much to keep track of. The foreign entity of concern provision. Okay, so what's that all about? I was comforted to learn that the foreign entity of concern provision does not go into effect until January 1st, 2024. I learned about this through a viewer email. Thank you very much, whoever it was. But that's good news. So that means if the battery pack has minerals from China, which is expected to be top of the list on foreign entities of concern, Russia too, you're not going to have to worry about being disqualified in 2023. But 14, 15, 16 months from now, whenever 2024 is, you will be disqualified if you have Chinese lithium in your battery pack. So that's something to keep in mind, but at least it's over a year away.
You've got to imagine a lot of executives in boardrooms are talking about exactly that right now because their supply chains probably for a long time have tied directly back in to some of those countries. Let's go here to the chat. So many good comments coming up here. Igor here mentioning, and it's a great reminder, state level incentives still exist. And in some states, and we've got videos on this, in some states, there are great incentives. I wonder, Justin, if we'll see state level incentives also, evolve and iterate here as federal incentives have changed as well. So a great comment there about state level incentives, and go just search YAA state tax incentives, and our videos, our articles will pop up that Justin has created.
Oh, that's fascinating to think about. I mean, off the top, personally, I don't think we're going to see a lot more state incentives, but I think they're going to hold firm and not go away. Maybe they're not going to phase them out as they had planned to. Thank you for reminding us, Igor, that, I mean, we even have an article on YAA at joinyaa.com about the best state EV incentives, because some states will give you a state tax exemption. What would you call that?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right way to frame it.
Yeah, so you could save quite a bit of money on an EV. Like if you're buying a Lucid Air in New Jersey, I believe it's New Jersey, you don't have to pay taxes on that purchase, which that's wild, right? Because they can afford to buy
Yes,
a
that
hundred and
truly is
forty
wild. That's like a
thousand dollar car.
better exactly. It's like a better incentive than what we just had here at the federal level. So it's super interesting to think about. We've got this question here from Colovian. Chevy lowered the Bolt prices because it didn't qualify for the credits at the time, and also for some other reasons. Now it does, but probably only for $3,750, like we've talked about. Now that this law has been passed, do you think GM will nix part or all of that price decrease? This is super interesting as well. What are your thoughts, Justin?
I think that General Motors is trying to get more GM branded EVs on the road to really raise their profile before they release the Equinox EV, the Blazer EV, the Silverado EV. I think with how massive they are, they're willing to just kind of take the loss with the Chevy Bolt in an effort to get their name out there. So I don't think they're going to reverse that, but it's all speculation.
Yeah, it really is. Interesting timing, though, where they're doing essentially a price decrease while everyone is doing a price increase. Now the consumer has a little extra incentive to be thinking about the Bolt. Why don't we pull this comment up here about the Mach-E? We know Ford is going to have to increase prices there. And Justice reminded us earlier in the chat, Ford has already raised Lightning prices by up to $7,000, which was 17% for that base trim level. So we are starting to see already MSRPs increase among popular electric vehicles.
Yeah, we can't forget that raw material costs had gone up about, I forget, it's between 110 and 130% year over year. And that has meant that the average EV now has about $8,000 worth of raw materials in it. And that is really costing automakers a lot when it comes to their profit margins.
We've got a great question in the chat asking for the link back to our state tax incentive. So I'm going to snag that. Why don't you
Okay.
comment here on James's comment about
Yes.
Mississippi isn't actually a mecca for EV adoption? So your thoughts there.
Well, I feel your pain, James, because as you guys might know, I live in wild and wonderful West Virginia. I love it. Beautiful weather, beautiful mountains, but no state level EV incentives. Ironically, our own senator was a key part of making this bill happen, but we won't get into that. So, James, here's what I can say. At least your state is going to be forced by the federal government to be a part of the national charging network, which when we talk about EVs, in surveys, consumers say, what do they need more than more affordable EVs? They actually need more access to charging for road trips and whatnot. Pricing is second, charging infrastructure is first as complaints for EV adoption. So, James, I'm going to drop this in the chat too. Got lots of useful comments here in the chat. It's every state's EV charging plan in 2022. The federal government has allocated millions of dollars to all 50 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico too. And this is all meant to be spent for building out a national charging network. So even if you don't have good incentives in Mississippi, you're going to have more charging by the end of 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a great comment from Colovian. Infrastructure is a chicken and the egg thing. Need more EVs to justify adoption, need more chargers to entice people to buy EVs. It really is a bit of a back and forth. It's like any type of marketplace. You need buyers and sellers. Who's going to come first? It's the same situation here. Do you think, Justin, as you've been able to process and read through what has been passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, do you think we're going to look back at this 10, 15 years from now and say, okay, this was the moment. This is when EV adoption really came into full swing? Or do you think that, it's making a lot of headlines right now, but actually it's not going to truly move the needle that much?
Well, this is another thing that I ruminate on quite a lot, because when you go to Europe, I mean, EV adoption rates are over 20%, even in China. mean, we don't have a lot in common with China except that our entire economy kind of depends on them. But
Yep.
they have 26% EV or 25% EV adoption rates. Here in the United States, we're at 5.5% right now. That's good for us, but is it a turning point? I mean, in 2021, people were saying it was going to be the turning point year. In 2022, we're saying it. When does it actually happen? I don't know. But I would be I still think that my prediction I made a few weeks ago is going to turn out to be relatively accurate, which is that by 2030, I think we'll be at about 30% EV market share for new vehicle sales. That's where I
I
think we'll be
wonder,
in
however,
2030.
I truly wonder if this is the thing that's going to move the needle, because if you think about the comments that you mentioned that you and Ray had during a prior discussion around, okay, well, is there any provision for, increasing the adjusted income, gross income thresholds or the prices for vehicles? And there isn't. And this is a 10-year long, a set of rules that we've put into place. The likelihood that these things are even useful 5 years from now for most of us is, I think, a little bit. Not only are they not particularly useful right now because the manufacturers source and manufacture these vehicles and the components of these vehicles not in the United States right now. Giovanni, kindly reminding us here that where was it? We've got Dodge announcing new EVs that don't qualify for things because they're made in Italy, right? Like, so the manufacturers have to switch, which makes these tax credits not particularly valuable for a lot of vehicles right now. And then you have inflation and income levels changing and costs changing, which will probably make a lot of these incentives also not particularly useful down the line. It just makes me scratch my head a little bit if this is really going to be the thing that moves us forward. Kind of challenging to imagine that it will, but I'll leave it there. Back to the chat. We've got so many good messages.
Yes, we do. Let's see, where should we head next? I think this is a good comment right here to discuss real quick. The F-150 Lightning, it's in a sticky situation because it's made in America. Believe Tennessee and Michigan. Tennessee's the long-term plan, currently Michigan. Battery pack is assembled in America, but we're not even going to get into where they might get their battery minerals from because that's who knows right now, right? Let's talk about the price caps because for trucks, $80,000 is the price cap to qualify for any of this incentive. Ford probably regrets the way that they bundled their pricing right now, and maybe they will change it because of this. In order to get an extended range 320 mile range F-150 Lightning, you have to spend quite a bit of money. And Giovanni in the chat says $85,000. I don't remember the exact number off the top, but I know it's well over 70,000 to get, like, that's the minimum you would pay to get 320 miles of range in the F-150 Lightning. They only allow the affordable F-150 Lightning Pro to have the extended range option if you're a fleet operator. I wonder if they'll change that because of this bill.
Exactly. Like, how many things are going to change as a result of what was just passed? You've got to imagine plenty, like the potential pricing on that trim of the Lightning and also the optionality to have extended range just for fleet customers. You've got to think some of these things are going to change.
Yes, I think they will. And we got some interesting insider information from Mark in the chat. Rather, it's an example from his past experiences. Thank you for sharing this, Mark. Mark says, in our battery company, only three of us knew the sourcing 100%. They had strict NDAs that protected our, don't know what that is, but basically
Intellectual property.
There we go. It is very clearly I don't have no, just kidding. Yeah, it's carefully guarded secrets, it appears.
Yeah, truly. Yeah, do you imagine there's a world where it shows up battery sourcing on the Monroney label? I mean, like when you buy a new vehicle, it says where the parts are from and where it was manufactured.
Yes. Man, Monroney labels, we're gonna have to call them battery sourcing labels. It's gonna be mansion labels pretty soon.
Let's go back in the chat to a comment that Todd had earlier. Do you think we could expect manufacturers who no longer qualify for any tax credit to lower their MSRPs, Ioniq 5, EV6, etc.? Unfortunately, Justin, it's not price that's going to withhold these vehicles from getting the tax credit. It's going to be where they're built, correct?
Yes. Well, there are multiple. Well, above all the battery requirements. Yeah, I know, Zach. I'm so sick and tired of this. Above all battery requirements, it must be having final assembly in the United States, Canada, or Mexico. So that's above all. If it is assembled in these areas in North America, then you also have to start looking at the battery sourcing. 40% of minerals in the US or free trade agreement countries, and then 50% of the components themselves assembled in the US or free trade agreement countries. So it's not very simple. But here's one thing I can say. Hyundai, before this was announced, Hyundai plans on increasing the Ioniq 5's pricing by a few $1,000s for the 2023 model. EVs are getting more expensive, not cheaper. A lot of that is because of raw material prices and just
Yep.
inflation means that everybody can raise prices, right? Because they're doing it, so I can do it. But it's not looking like they're going to lower prices because of this.
Definitely not. Okay, can we just touch on briefly here for a second the Volkswagen ID4? What was going on there with regards to being able to get the tax incentive before this bill was signed? Can we just talk about that and how fascinating it is, and honestly kind of funny as well?
Yes. So fill me in if you know anything that I don't know, but I know that I had viewers and YAA members contacting me via email and on the community forum, letting me know that Volkswagen was reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, you can hurry up and make this a binding contract. Your car might not be built for a very long time, but we can guarantee you a U.S. made ID4. And since you got a binding contract, it doesn't really matter." So here's why this matters, because right now we're in a weird situation for the ID4. Most of them are still coming in from Germany where they're built,
Yep.
but we've started to have some production trickling in from the Chattanooga, Tennessee plant, which is awesome. But this bill happens to go into effect right at the transition point for the ID4, where it's starting to become an American made car. So, Zach, fill us in. What was Volkswagen doing that really stuck out to you?
Just the idea here that let's say you were an ID4, purchaser, and you would have to go at a VIN specific level and make sure that the one that you've ordered, have your buyer's order for, the one that you're buying was actually coming out of Chattanooga and not from overseas. To me, just above all, exemplifies the complexity of, I don't know, international supply chains, the complexity of these rules. It was a perfect example of how these automakers, a lot of them, by the way, came out and said, hey, we're kind of caught off guard by this, are trying to figure out ways that they can now work with these rules rather than work against them. Because ideally, they should, and I'm seeing lots of comments in the chat, hey, these tax credits could have, really enhanced EV adoption, and instead they're going to stifle it. And I think for a short period of time, they absolutely will. But we're going to see how and which automakers can be kind of nimble on their feet, like Volkswagen is, or maybe it was just serendipitous and lucky timing that they had the Chattanooga plant coming out at the same time. I just thought it was fascinating. You're going to be checking your VINs to make sure you knew where your
Yes.
vehicle was produced, just so you could, qualify for $37.50 off the price tax
Yeah.
credit.
I don't know if we already have one, but we'll need to publish a VIN decoder pretty soon. Yeah, that's going to be a thing. One other thing that should be mentioned is that the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which represents Ford, Toyota, a whole bunch of others, they're pretty pissed about all of this because they had been and continue to promote the electrification of the auto industry, basically justifying the hundreds of billions of dollars that had been spent by American automakers, being like, yeah, this is the future. And now that they've committed to this future, this is what happens. More than half their EVs lose the incentive that was getting buyers there in the first place. It's pretty wild. But another thing I saw on social media is just fascinating.
And there it is there just from Kenny. I want to say VW contacted me about locking in my order and reconfigure it to a 2023 as it will be built in Chattanooga. Crazy.
Hey, you know what? I'm such a fan of the Chattanooga built ID4. This is the first Appalachian built electric vehicle. I live in Appalachia. It's a very overlooked region. Now we've got an EV made here, right here in the region. But one thing that I also want to mention, Zach, I know we're running out of
Yeah.
time, but on social media, I've seen a lot of consumers or would-be buyers venting about how little dealers know about these changes to the tax credit. We had consumers calling up their sales representative at the dealership, asking them how their sales going to be impacted, and they had no idea. They would try to change the subject, I think because they were scared to talk about it.
Yeah.
Or they, in some cases, just flat out told the buyer that if they don't buy it, someone else is going to buy it. So it doesn't really matter. That, people were being told that at Kia dealerships, Ford dealerships. It's wild.
And let's be clear, we hope, to be honest, that a lot of folks that work at dealerships that are selling electric vehicles start watching some of these videos, because we can then help them be more educated in having those conversations. It is complex. Things are changing rapidly. It's really important as consumers we understand these things because it affects our pocketbook, but quite frankly, could make a better sales process for everyone involved if the salespeople and management and whatnot were also knowledgeable. And again, everything was very, rapidly moving leading up to this point. Now we know what the rules are for the next decade, so we can all get up to speed. I just want to mention, Justin, really quickly, we are here to help. So if you are going to buy a car this year, next year, anytime in the future, join YAA.com. We are running currently our Inflation Fighter special. You can thank my dad for coming up with that. If you use the code IFS when you become a YAA member, it'll save you 20%. So we're running that for the remainder of this month. Raw material costs might be going up, Justin, but our prices, man, we're fighting inflation. They're going down.
Love to hear it. And we have an electric vehicle forum with thousands of members. So if you guys love EVs or you just simply want to know more about EVs or might be thinking about buying one, head over to the electric vehicle forum at joinyaa.com. I'm there every day.
Awesome, Justin. Well, I'm going to get ready. We've got a special guest over on the Ray and Zach channel, Tiffany, one of the co-founders of a website called markups.org. She's going to be joining us at the top of the hour. Super excited for that conversation. If you haven't checked out markups.org, you might want to. It's a pretty cool resource out there. Justin, thanks for hosting another great show today. Always happy to be here with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Zach, and I'll see somebody on Friday.
See you then.